welcome to the CoachC podcast, and we are so excited today. We have a giant in the technology industry with us today. Mike Slade, who started his career at Microsoft and then moved from Microsoft into, well, he's going to tell us some of those stories, but I think from Microsoft, he went to Next, and then he worked with Steve Jobs at Apple. In the process, he also worked ESPN, was one of Mike's companies, and sold that to Disney. So he has been in technology, in industry, an entrepreneur, owned many companies, and helped some really big leaders in tech, including Bill Gates, Paul Allen, and Steve Jobs. So we're really excited. So if you're tuning in today and you're watching the CoachC YouTube channel, or you're listening to the podcast, welcome, Mike. Thanks so much for being with us today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. Glad to be here.
And I know people ask you a lot about, what was it like working at Microsoft in the heyday, launching Excel, being on the forefront? I'm sure you get that question a lot, but I have a different question than that specific one. My question is, if you were creating Microsoft today, now, and Excel and some of the technology, what different things would you do now than you would have done then? And it's a tough question. I'm putting you on the spot completely, but I'm really curious.
Are you asking about me or about the company?
You. So you, what would you do?
Well, when I went to work there, it's a really good question. I was determined to have fun while I worked hard. And most people who worked there weren't. They were just working hard. So most people didn't have any fun. I mean, I know that sounds like an extreme thing to say, but it was full of people who worked 18-hour days and gained 100 pounds and, stayed up all night. And I did work really hard, but I also during the 7.5 years I worked there, I ran a couple marathons. I did 4 double century bike rides. I climbed Mount Rainier twice, took a lot of fun vacations, and worked hard and played hard. Used to bicycle commute to work and back 50 miles a day, with friends who were training for a big bike race. And, so I kind of was by Microsoft standards, I was a Renaissance man kind of. And so it turned out that later on, when I got to be closer friends with Bill Gates, I found out that they all thought I was a goof off, right? And then they only realized later that I was actually capable of doing all the work without having to work so many hours. So it's kind of funny. So if I had to do it over again, I might work a little harder. That sounds like a funny thing to say. I might have worked a little harder. Although,
I think you had the formula for success in the ability to have it all, and to maybe, if you hadn't goofed off and ran those things, maybe you wouldn't have been so creative. Maybe you would have come up with some of those ideas.
Well, I probably wouldn't have left, and I'm kind of glad I left, even though it was a hard decision to leave, because it was a place where if you weren't a brilliant technologist, which I wasn't, you were supposed to be kind of a buttoned up business person, because Bill already knew all the strategy. It was all his decision making anyway. And I was sort of neither of those. So it was good for me to go somewhere else. And Steve Jobs, who I worked for after Bill Gates, was more emotionally like me, in that he and I both led with our emotions a little more than Bill did, who was much more leading with more of a purely ruthless logic thing. And Steve was smart too, sure, but he and I both wore everything on our sleeve, kind of, So we were emotionally in tune. It sounds like a strange thing to say, but we really were. But anyway, but it was really fun. I mean, Microsoft, the thing that people don't really realize about those days is that nobody thought computers would get as pervasive as they are now. And even when the internet started, and I was running Starwave, the company that built ESPN.com that we sold to Disney, nobody thought it would get. So there's a thing I just put up on Facebook. I found this old article about I was on this panel in 1997 called The Future of News. And I was on this panel discussion with Michael Bloomberg and Arthur Sulzberger and Andrew Lack of NBC News. And because, by 1997, MSNBC had launched, and CNN was online, and ABC News was online, and there were news sites on the internet. The New York Times had a premium wall, Wall Street Journal did, but it was still on your computer, right? And so it's funny looking at the quotes from then. Those guys were all just thinking of it as another distribution channel for their existing product, and I was in this panel being kind of a jerk and saying no, the person in front of the computer is totally different, and he or she has a different set of expectations, and you have to tailor it for them. It can't be the same old thing. But even I never thought that you'd have a phone in your hand with a big screen and a super fast connection, and that you'd like make hotel reservations, and buy a house in the back of an Uber ride. That just seemed like crazy, right? Wireless internet seemed crazy, right? So the only point I would say is that even when you're doing it, you never realize how big it can be. And I also think it's probably a good lesson for people that you shouldn't be in a hurry for something to get gigantic. Just try to get the first $1 million of revenue or whatever, and then get another one.
Yeah.
There's no such thing as a big company that didn't have a couple of hard years and was a little crappy small company for a while, right? There's almost no counterexample of that.
Yeah.
And people, I think, forget that.
I want to unpack a couple of things that you said that were really brilliant, Mr. Renaissance Man. Today you would be called a disruptor, because that's, then you're a Renaissance man. Today you would actually be D&D disruptor. And
Right.
So different cultures, when you left Microsoft, I think you were pointing to, you didn't fit the Microsoft culture.
Right.
And so either the culture changed.
Was well liked. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a difference between being well liked and there's a mismatch in culture.
Right.
And often leaders will say to me, I'm hiring for culture, I'm hiring for culture. Except they don't understand the culture of the company that they currently have and what impact it makes on their future.
Yeah, good point.
What would you say about that?
Well, so it's funny, when I ran my company, we did definitely hire for culture. We were building a bunch of cutting edge multimedia products. And so I would screen really hard for people who were like super into it. And I would challenge them, like, if you're here for the wrong reasons, you won't have any fun. I used to do that in the early days of Microsoft too. Early days of Microsoft, when I would interview people, I'd be like, when not many people were into computers, I'd be like, do you really like computers? Like, because if you don't, you will be miserable here, okay? Because everyone else is like a super geeky, like unscrewing the back of the PC, like if you don't really like them, go away. I would challenge people to try and prove to me that they were geeky enough, right? And when we ran our own company, we were building ESPN.com, and so we wanted people who were crazy sports nuts, right? Lived, breathed sports, and worked for like no money. We would hire people at like $19,000 a year right out of college to help edit ESPN.com, and they were all thrilled to be there, because that's their whole life was sports. They love sport. They slept it, they breathed it. We would all get to go play basketball at Paul Allen's house on Monday night. He built a replica of the Trailblazers practice facility in his mansion on Mercer Island. He would open it up to us on Monday night. And for those guys, that was worth more than a raise, right? Which is so fun, right? So we definitely hired for culture that way. And we wanted people who were, well, back up one thing. The toughest thing about a company is the macro environment in which it's participating. And so most of the things I did in my career that were fun were in an industry where there was a super high rate of change, that while you were there, things were changing fast and predictions were basically worthless, right? And so, because it's early in the curve or whatever. So if you're in some mature business, you're hiring for a very, very different culture than if you're in a business that's changing rapidly and is growing and is still in the early parts of whatever it is that's changing. And so you have to hire different kinds of people for those things. And so since I sort of was like incapable of working in a company that wasn't in a fast growing thing, I would only either find people or attract people or hire people who were interested in something like that. And it sounds fun, but it's actually harder than you think, because you have to be comfortable with the fact that your forecast isn't worth the paper it's printed on, right? So, I do venture capital now, and people bring me these forecasts, and, it's got like, the 36th month is 7.84 million. And I'm like, dude, like the likelihood of that cell being correct in your spreadsheet is in fact 0, okay? Right. And the guy gets all mad, and I'll say, I'll bet you $1 million that forecast is wrong. Will you take that bet, okay, right now? And he goes, no, we'll see, because you're wrong. It's just an Excel spreadsheet, right? It's just a formula.
Right.
How you built it? I can derive the formula by looking at it, okay?
Yeah.
So, so anyway, the point is that the highest upside, the most beta and the most upside comes in businesses where it's early days.
Yeah.
And by definition, that means you have to be comfortable managing super high amounts of uncertainty. And you have to put your brain in this thing where you compartmentalize into the things you can control, cost, schedule, people, and the things you can't control, which are like revenue, size of the denominator, is the business, does it even exist? Like say you spent all your passion on VR. Well, VR is taking a long time to get anywhere, right? So you better be patient or have, so anyway, things like that, I always try to view everything through that lens, if you will. Where are we in whatever thing this is, right?
Right.
Like when we built ESPN.com, nobody ever built an interactive news or sports service before. We were the first ones to ever do it. And so everything was new. There were no rules, right? And you had to operate mostly on instinct and then feedback because nothing else really mattered.
Right. And I think that's so applicable to where people are now with high levels of uncertainty and unknowing. And I think in this particular case, we're in the middle of a pandemic. There are different levers people are used to pulling in their business, and those traditional ones are not giving them what they need. Like they don't have the certainty to be able to use those tools. Like you said, when you're building something from scratch, you have no idea how it's going to net out or what's going to work or how it's going to work in the market, how quickly people will pick it up, or is it the right fit for all of the things that you're trying to accomplish in a business plan. So if you were to look at some of the things that, how do you help people calm down and how do you help them focus their decision-making process in such high levels of uncertainty?
Well, it is interesting. It's a good question. I'm on a bunch of boards and different companies have experienced different levels of stress because of pandemic. And one of the interesting things is that there have been several times where things that were a negative, right? Like, oh, geez, we can't do this for a while. If you think about it, they also have a positive associated with them. Like one of the companies I'm on the board of has a pretty good events business where they do events for the industry that they're in. And the events are mildly profitable and they're not that big. They're a few hundred people or something and they're kind of targeted. So they can't do them, right?
Right.
So they're doing online events. And guess what? They have no cost. So they're 100% gross margin and they have no capacity constraint.
Right.
So yeah, you can't charge as much because it's this lame online thing instead of being in a room, but they have zero cost. So they're really profitable. And so it completely changes the spreadsheet and the way you think about it. And instead of doing 5 or 10 a year, you could do 50 a year. Nobody cares. They got nothing else to do, right? So it's really funny how a business. So I'll give you another example. My daughter's boyfriend used to work for Herman Miller, and he sold not just chairs, but office stuff and office planning in the Bay Area for Herman Miller. And he was doing great because every startup wanted cool stuff from Herman Miller. Just killing it. It's a neat company, big old company. And he quit to work for the startup that does space planning as a software as a service in the cloud. It's a really neat company. And then the pandemic hit, and I was like, man, that's going to be bad, right? But it turned out it was really good because everybody has to reconfigure their space.
Right.
So it's got the world's greatest entree to his sales calls, right?
Yeah.
Every single person has to rethink their space in a world where they really don't even know who's going to come in the office and when, right? So anyway, those are just little dumb examples of how the thing about the pandemic is all you really know is that it isn't going to go away for a while.
Right.
And if you think you know when, A, you have ESP, and B, you're wrong. So, good luck. Anyway, whatever you think, you're probably wrong. And so you have to plan
what we thought 10 weeks ago,
completely
now we were completely wrong.
Yeah.
So we made decisions based on data points without enough information and context. And I think a lot of companies have done that throughout periods of time. It brings me to a question because you talk about the pandemic and how people are shifting and what companies are doing to morph their business offerings or their cost centers or their structures. I think it also offers an opportunity for a lot of companies to expand into global experiences that they might have thought they were only local previously. So they're shifting the way they think about their business.
Because there's no reason not to be global.
Right.
The whole thing about Zoom or whatever technology you're using, Teams, RingCentral, whatever, is that it is not great, but it's not nearly as bad as people thought it was.
Right.
And even 5 years ago, it was horrible. But the combination of better tech, better system integration, and better bandwidth, even in the last 5 years, means that, sometimes it's pretty bad and you have a bad connection and 20 people, but oftentimes it's just not that bad, right? And so once it gets to, this sounds so weird, once it's not that bad, it'll work for almost anything, and so you have all these tech companies saying that people can work from home, for at least the next 6 to 12 months. And then a lot of them are saying, hey, work from home forever. We don't care, right?
What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's really interesting. I have a bunch of real estate investments, and I'm just making a new one. And I was thinking to myself, why am I making this investment if office spaces are dead? And then I realized that the one I'm making is about engineering, like hard stuff, like not software engineering, hard. And they actually have to be there to do it, right? And so I think what you're going to see, I could be wrong, but I think what's going to happen is there are going to be two kinds of office workers: pure knowledge workers and other. And pure knowledge workers, you could have a thing where most of them don't come into the office, or not very often, or maybe a day a week, or maybe a day a month, And if that's true, you're going to see the whole notion of urban planning and big, hip urban centers completely change before your very eyes. People, where would you rather live? San Francisco or Sun Valley, right? Or, or Colorado Springs, or, New York, right? Or whatever the example is. I'm not going to declare victory for Omaha quite yet, but I'm going to say that there's a lot of places that are mid-sized and are out in the country and beautiful that might be nicer places to live and be way cheaper than living in, right off a market in some tiny condo that's $4,000 a month in San Francisco, or in LA or New York or even Seattle. It's really expensive. So I do think that's going to happen, because you have these really big, powerful companies like Amazon, Apple, Google, Microsoft saying, hey, work from home.
Yeah.
We don't care. Completely, like, it's going to be a perk, just like nice offices and snacks were a perk, right?
Right.
And once you do it for a while, you realize just how much insane time you're burning, not only commuting, but then recreating life in some office, right? Like another little house. There's that famous routine George Carlin does about stuff.
Yes.
And when you listen to that routine, I just listened to it with my kid. I'm such a bad parent. I'm playing a
It's good parenting. I love George Carlin.
Once we listen to that routine, I'm like, my God, that's what offices are. It's just you take some of your stuff and you create this little fake home in your office with a picture of your spouse and your dog and your little fidget spinner, and it's just stupid, right? So and it's gonna change the housing market in a big way. Extra bedrooms, separate structures in the yard for I was over at my brother-in-law's house, and he's building a little office in his backyard.
Yes.
Why not? It's kind of like a giant shed, basically,
Yeah.
But I think that will happen. So I believe that whatever happens with the pandemic, it will still be one of those things where we're underestimating how big a change it will be.
Yes.
Because
I agree.
So many things are online anyway. You're like, why am I going to some dumb office, just to hang out with a bunch of people,
Right.
But it'll depend on the city and the place. But I do think it will happen. And, the way these things work sometimes is, there used to be this time when you could read about Amazon and you'd say they're only 2% of all retail sales, right? And even then, it was a bigger deal than you thought, right? And it could be like that. It could only be 2% of all office workers, and the next thing you know, it's 10%, 20%. But so there's a lot of changes, but that's the biggest one to me, because that's a cataclysmic change.
Yes.
That happens.
Yes.
Crazy.
I think we're seeing it here in Toronto as well. So a lot of people that are living in these, 500 square foot condo downtown Toronto, so that they can get to Google, Microsoft, or one of the large institutions down there. They don't have to go back to work. They're buying up property in the more rural areas, and housing is exploding outside of the city. and condos are becoming more empty. So
Yeah.
it for sure that's happening. I also suspect that leaders are going to have to challenge themselves in how do you keep your company culture. So one of the things that we talked about is that culture. Like you weren't the culture at Microsoft, and then working with Steve and with Paul Allen and the different cultures you worked in through the years. What do you think will happen if people are so spread around and relating really through Zoom and getting a lot of their work? How do you think people will be able to connect and create that powerful, cohesive culture?
It's a good question. I have kind of a cynical view about it. So in our building here in Seattle is Zillow, which is a great company and has a lot of employees. And they probably have 10 or 12 floors in this building. It's a beautiful building right overlooking the Sound. And the guy that founded Zillow, both of them are good friends of mine. So I've been up in their offices a bunch. They gave us card keys because it's right above our office. So we can go up there and steal snacks. So anyway, so we go up there sometimes. And it's laid out in this way where it's all tables. It's not cubicles. It's just people sitting at tables. And then there's really large, beautiful common areas with like free food, and view of the Sound and everything. But anyway, and most everybody that works there is quite young. And I see them on the elevator all the time because we're in the same elevator bank. So they're all like, my kids' age, 27, 26, whatever. And when you go up there and walk around, the thing that you realize most is that when people are working, which mostly means sitting in front of a computer screen, right, and talking or whatever, 100% of them have headphones on.
Yes.
Which is like, I understand it, and it's the weirdest thing I've ever seen in my life. It's an office. So part of me thinks they're not talking to each other anyway, at all. Not like when I was in the office, or if you watch an episode of The Office, right? They're talking to each other all the time. There's all this banter, and which is actually not that far from real life, right? But my theory is that that's not happening.
Right.
It's maybe happening on break, but even then they have their headphones in and listen to a podcast or something. So it may be that culture doesn't exist anymore anyway.
Right. So you have to find different ways to create it. Or maybe you don't need culture. Is culture necessary? What are your thoughts? I'm a culture. I coach too, so I'm curious. Like, push back on me. Do you need it?
I know. Well, I think you need it, but I don't know what it is anymore. Is what I'm trying to say. Because, for example, most meetings are kabuki.
Yeah.
Most meetings are somebody talking about something they've already made their mind up about, and then just going through some goddamn PowerPoint slides. Or in the Amazon case, this memo has been written that's so synthesized and homogenized and pasteurized. By the time the meeting happens, it's all just a fait accompli, right? So, which means for a short meeting. So what I don't really know is, in this environment of people wearing headphones and the internet not being a mystery or being kind of super well known, I don't know how much culture is being created anymore. That's what I don't really know. See, part of the thing is that culture is helpful when you don't know exactly what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Have a system where it's super easy to measure what's going on. And a lot of internet companies now are based, the whole thing is measurement, right? We sell measurement, we measure what we sell, whatever. That's almost it almost trumps culture in a funny way, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know the answer. It's a weird question. The CEO, the leaders, they do lead by example. And so that's true whether you're in person or not, because a lot of the time is about, one of the things that I always thought was sort of funny about, like when I worked at Microsoft, is that, I started working there when there were 400 people and I left when there were 8,800. And when I started, there were only two decision makers, Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer. And when I left, there were only two decision makers, Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer. And I asked Bill about it one time, and he was like, "Yeah, we basically made all the big decisions. We didn't need you guys to make decisions."
Right.
I'm like, "What?" So I think that's true.
Your value just went down.
I thought I was making big decisions here, But so anyway, my point is that in a lot of companies, what you're doing, if you're not the number one or two person, you may be doing lots of good things, but you're not making decisions. Right? You're not making big decisions.
Right.
Strategic,
Yeah.
Avoid the iceberg. You're not doing that. You're just shoveling coal, right? So I'm not trying to be cynical about culture. I'm just sort of saying that It's all about the leader, right?
Yeah.
And if you are a leader, I think one of the things that I learned when I became a CEO is that everything you say is super scrutinized, just like a politician.
Yeah.
And you have to not only be on all the time, but you have to repeat yourself all the time.
Yeah.
You
I don't think
cannot
that's
tell
going to
people.
change. Those levels of leadership are not going to change because of the pandemic. I think, one of the big challenges I think for leaders is that engagement level. Like people finding their purpose in your company while they're working remotely is going to be a huge challenge, because if you've got top talent and you're not delivering, they don't feel valuable, or you're not delivering that to your people and they're all remote, they'll vote with their feet and just switch. They'll just change the thing on their laptop now and
That's right.
a logo on their screen. So that's going to be a big challenge, is making sure you have some compelling reason for people to work toward. And that's what we call purpose. So, what is the purpose? Why are you in business? What difference do you make? What impact are you making? And I think that's going to be a big challenge for leaders to pull that out of a remote workforce.
Well, it's a good point, because, one of the things that was funny about the early days of Microsoft is that we always said that no one who came would leave because there was nowhere to go. Right? There in Seattle, right? All there was Boeing, And so, whereas in Silicon Valley, all you had to do was change the exit off of Highway 280, from company A to company B. So, I mean, it really wasn't a big deal. People did change jobs all the time there and not in Seattle. Now, of course, but so your point, which I think is a really good one, is that in a world where you're mostly working from home, anybody can change a job. One of my companies I'm on the board of, we hired a CFO the week the lockdown started. He's never met anyone who works for him.
Yes.
That's a hard transition.
Yeah.
I mean, he's doing fine, but imagine, right?
Yeah, I have 2 clients that are in that situation where they pivoted and they are now working in different companies during the pandemic. So they've never face-to-face met. It's all been on Zoom.
Wild. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you see what their house looks like.
Yeah. And their office.
Right. Exactly. That's funny.
Yeah.
So it is probably the simplest takeaway is that you have to work overtime to lead.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's talk about that, because I think also leaders, at this point, they're having to attend to issues that they didn't sign on for. Managing company stress levels, anxiety, all of the nuances that this pandemic has brought kind of and put it on the table that were under the table before. We all know employees have stress. We all know they have anxiety. It's part of life. It's part of being a leader. It's part of working. But now this seems to be the conversation that so many people are having because of the heightened levels of uncertainty. And, a lot of leaders are like, we know the vision, we're clear on what we want to do, go get it done. Other leaders are trying to pivot and attend to, how do I engage people and address these high levels of anxiety? Because you can't make powerful decisions if your brain is scrambled. And if you're in a company, if you're building it or leading it, and there's, what I would call like the freeze zone, right? Because there's so much anxiety, so much scrambling going on. It's like, what is the decision I need to make? And you don't even necessarily know. So what would you say about leading that? And how would you go about leading that now?
Well, it's interesting because in some ways dealing with the pandemic versus a normal old work scenario is more stressful, but in some ways it's less stressful, because when you leave a meeting and go bounce your kid on your knee, or go take your dog for a walk, or go hit your workout room for half an hour, I mean, it's a lot better than sitting in your car or riding the subway or getting on an airplane or taking the taxi to the airport and getting on an airplane, going through security, then going back to the commute, 5 hours to get home, including both trips to the airport. So in some ways it should be a lot less stressful. It sounds stupid, but it really is true.
Yeah.
Your home is your little sanctum. And so there are things about it that, and I also think that because Zoom meetings are more stressful than real meetings, that they end quicker. So, which is just shows you how much
more stressful.
Yes.
You think Zoom meetings are more stressful than in person?
Sure, because you're like, it's an you're on, In a real meeting, you're like, it's Fritos, I got to go to the bathroom, right? But here it's like, no, I think, and everybody I've talked to, my kids got really fatigued when we first started doing Zoom schooling versus just sitting in the classroom, right? Because it's like, can they see me? What am I doing? Yeah, I know, right? And so, no, so I do think in my experience, the meetings end quicker.
Well, I think people get to the point faster.
Yeah, which is good. It just shows you how much time gets wasted in a meeting normally. It's all this bullshit, and people just yammering on and posturing so they can be heard. 28 people in a meeting, they all want to talk. You're like, okay, it's your turn. Say something. Don't be too stupid. So, I mean, part of me thinks that it should make things more straightforward and a little less, reduce a little bit of the indulgent immaturity inherent in the kabuki of meetings, which I'm a big contributor of over my career, but I'm just saying it is silly, right? Just go watch The Office.
Like tossing the Doritos at people in the middle of the meeting.
I'm always telling jokes, right? Over and over again. But I do think, so that part is good. I think the hard part is that, the hard part will come. Most companies are doing what they were already doing before the pandemic started or iterating off of it. But if it's a year from now and you're doing something new, that's going to be really tricky. To brainstorm and create things from scratch, not together, will be really hard.
I think the other point to that is it doesn't mean they can't be together. It doesn't mean you can't have meetings for the sole purpose of strategy and planning and creation. And then you go back and you go work and implement it from your home.
Although
that balance.
I agree, although we are in a place in our Western society now where asking anybody to do anything they don't want to do is the equivalent of killing them, right? So I don't care what it is, right? I want you to blow your nose. I'm so oppressed, right? Whatever it is. And so part of me, I don't think that's really true. That is, I think like if you're at some big company like Microsoft or Google or Apple or Amazon, and you tell the 52 people on Project X that they have to come to a meeting next Friday, you're going to get 5 emails saying, I'm not going to go. My brother-in-law's garbage man's grandma's, immunocompromised. I have to stay home and wear a hazmat suit to go to the bathroom. Whatever. You're going to get a bunch of those people who are all offended that you're killing me by making me go to this meeting, right?
You can't take my rights. Yeah, it's possible. I think also on the flip side of that, people are also yammering to be together. So there's also we're social creatures. So we do like to be together. So I think there will be a lot of that. Let's talk about sports, because I know you're a big sports guy, and tennis, golf, basketball, all this football, all the things that you love. What about the NHL is coming back online with no fans? The baseball's coming back with no fans. So
they're all trying.
Yeah.
I think they're all. So as an example, they organized this thing where they took all the soccer teams and put them in Orlando to play soccer together with a tournament with no fans.
Right.
And they already sent 2 teams home because they have too many cases.
Right.
So all these people have great intentions for 2 reasons. One is everyone loves sports, and 2 is they're gigantic businesses. And so if you unplug it for a year, the model's broken forever, basically.
Yeah.
The model is this thing. You break down the model of college football or pro basketball, you have all these levers churning to create all this value of billion-dollar franchises. So if you stop it, it might never come back. Right?
Yeah.
That's weird to think about, right? So they're all trying really hard. I'm worried that they're all going to have unpleasant surprises, that, there's a critical mass time. Already you have famous guys opting out.
Yeah.
When did that ever happen, right? Like, I don't want to play. Nobody ever said that before, right?
Yeah.
And so then, for perfectly good reasons. But so I'm worried that in the next 6 months, all these experiments will have something go wrong with them. That's not anyone's fault. It'll just be, if you have a 12-man roster on your basketball team and 4 guys have test positive, you basically can't play.
Right.
So what do? Forfeit? It's like a little league. It's weird, right?
Yeah.
So Some of these sports it's easier, golf, it's pretty easy to have a golf tournament with no fans and socially distanced. That, it's no big deal. But
Right.
any sport with contact or, the basketball, you're always hockey, football, those. So I'm worried as a
Yeah.
fan. I'm worried that you could have a real breakdown. Like college football is the most interesting example because even though they have a lot of TV money, most of those athletic departments make a ton of their money off football ticket sales. And they're going to get killed this year. And those sports, college football, pays for every other sport in every American university. It pays for volleyball, pays for field hockey, it pays for women's softball, it pays for fencing or whatever the hell it, it doesn't matter what it is, it pays for it, right? And so if that goes away, which it will, I think, it could really change everything. And the reason I say that is that I think if that happened, if most of the major sports just for whatever reason collapsed for a year, I think it'd be really depressing for people. I worry that a second wave will get people really down. The first lockdown was like a big long vacation for anybody with a little savings, right?
Right. It's a little novelty right now.
I don't mean to minimize it for people who had hard times, but and by the way, my daughter got paid more than she was making, so it's a joke, right? So some people made money, but a second wave, a third wave, and that's why I bring it up in the context of sports, because I don't think it will work. I think something will go wrong. Now, it could be that by the end of this year, you can test every day. That stuff is coming, right? So you can test every day, it's different, but you'll still get people who are sick, right?
Yes.
And then they're sick, we don't have a cure yet, so you got to go quarantine them.
Yes.
Right? So
I
worry about it. I don't see a way it's going to work. And by the way, it's pretty weird to watch a game with no fans.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure it's also very weird to play it. It's like practice.
Must be. It's like one notch above a scrimmage.
Yeah, it's a practice.
Yeah. So yes. So I worry. I don't really know the answer because I don't have a crystal ball, but it seems likely that more stuff will go wrong. That if you start out, with a abbreviated hockey season or abbreviated basketball tournament or a soccer tournament, you put them all in one place, that something goes wrong. It's pretty fragile in terms of the number of people. Even football has 53 people on the roster, right? So if 10 get sick, 5 get sick, the U.S. positivity rate right now is relatively high number, right? So it doesn't take much to basically eviscerate the team. Then what do you have, right? So it's an area where I don't have a good answer, and I'm kind of like worried, and just because it seems more likely something will go wrong than not. I know that makes any sense.
No,
it's kind of
does.
weird. I mean, it does show you how silly and pointless being a sports fan is, right? It serves no purpose, right?
I've been saying that for a long time in my house.
I'm still playing, I'm still fine, I don't get to watch Roger Federer, but I'm still good, but it is weird to think about that people, as George Carlin said, you just root for laundry, right? The players come and go, but you root for laundry. I'm a Yankee fan, but it's really funny. But anyway, so I don't know the answer to it. I am kind of worried about it, I guess the headline I would say, because there's too many combinations of things that could go wrong. That spell really bad news for both TV, certainly for Gate, but also for TV revenue.
Right.
And that's all those guys got is TV revenue and Gate. That's all those businesses are.
Yeah. It's definitely one to watch, because I don't think there's a solution. I don't think there's like you said, it's something to be worried about. My bigger concern, when you look at why do people watch sports? So I have 3 competitive athletes in my house, and we have taken away hockey, rugby, and dance completely, full stop. So when you look at the kids, they watch sports because they have a dream to be awesome or be extraordinary or be the next Sidney Crosby. When you take those figures out of the equation, what happens to that dream? And what happens to those kids? That you're removing a future that they would have really worked hard towards. And I think that's going to be a big trickle down effect and have a very negative impact in the long run, for sure.
I totally agree with you. Kids, well, even adults, when you fall in love with something, you get very aspirational about it and you project onto it. Yeah, no, I agree with you.
Yeah.
But I do think until there's a vaccine or really, really good treatments, both of which could happen by the end of the calendar year, but we could have, I would just advise people to emotionally gird for tricky times between now and Christmas.
Right.
I think it could be really hard. Whatever's going on in your life, it could be hard. It could get worse, not better.
Yes. Yeah.
And just in terms of things that are inconvenient or sort of like, again, I just kind of have that feeling.
Yeah.
Like my kids are supposed to go back to school in the fall, and they're going to go middle school 1 week, high school the next week, no sports, right? Intramurals, but not, and I just don't think it'll last. I think someone gets sick. What's going to happen to the teachers? Some of those teachers are old, so what's going to happen?
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, it's a weird time. And for a business person, you have to be the, a voice of sanity and comfort and reason. You got to run your business to make sure you don't go out of business.
Yes. Right. I think that's always the case, right? You need to run your business properly and powerfully.
Yeah, but normally you can predict better than this.
No, now you can't.
Yeah, that's right. So
I think there's a benefit of that. So as you said, when we first started talking, people are having to be innovative and do things in completely different ways, more like explorers in their business. How do you do things in an unpredictable environment, right? You can't plan for it, so you have to figure it out. So I think there's a lot more people going to be able to create some things that are really extraordinary. And then there's going to be a lot of people and a lot of companies and a lot of businesses that won't survive this. And it's one of those things.
Well, if you think you're running lean, run leaner.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It sounds stupid, but that's the single best advice I could give somebody is, you're going to lay off 4 people, lay off 6 people, or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
Because your ability to predict will be worse than usual.
Yes. What are the businesses that you are seeing that are thriving? So I know you do a lot of VC and you're raising capital for companies. What are the areas that you're seeing people make big shifts in that are coming online that weren't there before? What are you putting your bets behind?
Well, I mean, it's not, there's no strategy to VC. It's just, but if people tell you there is one there, but, random things, we invested in this company that was doing fitness workout videos, and they were really smart people, and they'd done stuff before, and their model was to go free for a while and then get you to charge. And literally we helped fund it with a bunch of other investors. And then right after that, the lockdown happened, and they're gone through the roof. You know? So is that brilliant? Is it lucky? I don't know. I mean, it was a trend anyway, right? So I'm on the board of this company that makes these super smart drones that fly themselves, Skydio. That is this really cool AI engine. So you can fly it if you want, and it never crashes, or it can fly itself and follow you. And they're getting a tremendous amount of interest from both government and commercial for inspection and remote presence and stuff. And so they're going great guns. And that's a company that works well remotely, so it didn't really affect them at all. So it just kind of depends. I'm on the board of this company, Real Self, that is kind of the trip advisor of med spas and plastic surgery. And they got killed, but now most of that stuff's open again. So not in California, but elsewhere. They just closed it all yesterday again in California.
The numbers went back up.
Yeah. But I just, in general, if you're a CEO, it's hard because these are truly exogenous variables and you have no ability to control them. All you can do is react, right?
Yeah.
So you better come up with things that are COVID proof, like virtual consultations or whatever it is, virtual events, things that, the one thing I would always advise people is that most of the stuff is pretty easy to try.
Yeah.
Relatively cheap and easy to try, whatever business you're in. And if you're not trying it, you're stupid.
Right.
I mean, really, why wouldn't you try it, right?
So it was really interesting when you and I had talked about the Collision conference, and there was a couple other large conferences, and I had signed up and I bought the ticket. And the thing for me, and I speak all the time, so this shouldn't be a big deal for me. I was literally paralyzed when I went to hit those buttons on those virtual meeting rooms, because you see this big fancy thing, and it's like a networking room or who's live on stage or who's talking now. And I had to get through this fear because all of my life, whoever's on the other side of that computer is a scary person. They're a predator. They're going to steal your money. They're going to steal your kids. They're going to come after you.
Right.
And I didn't even realize that was running the show. I'm like, what is going on here? Why can't I go into this virtual room and network with people? I think there's going to be a lot more of that kind of recognition where the old thought patterns and the old processes of scary people are on the other side of your monitor. You have to get through that. Because otherwise, how are you going to do business?
Well, but that's also a generational thing, watching, my kids are 12 and 14, and watching them adapt in March to online school, where most of the curriculum was online anyway, right?
Yeah.
I wouldn't tell you that they necessarily loved it, but the amount of time it took them to adapt to it was like a day.
Right.
Nothing, right?
Right.
They know how to use a laptop, they know how to use headphones, they know how to use Zoom. They figured out Zoom in 5 minutes.
Yes. And my 7-year-old figured it out pretty quickly.
Yeah, so, they're the ones to model, right? Not us old people.
Not us old people filled with our fears and trepidations.
Right.
And
right? My kids, to give you an example, they play Fortnite with their two best friends. And when we were in Palm Springs for most of the lockdown, it turned out their best friends and their family were also in Palm Springs for the lockdown. And we would occasionally go out for a bike ride with them, socially distanced.
Right.
We'd finish the bike ride and they'd race back to their respective houses to play the games online together, rather than being together in person. And they'd have like 2-3 devices going, Fortnite, FaceTime video, and they're doing all this stuff.
My guys do the same.
And it's like, I swear they would have rather done that than be together.
Yeah. I'm noticing the same trend. It's weird to me.
Yeah. Well, but they don't care. They don't associate one more than the other. So I do think that's when you are running a business, you should think about it from the standpoint of, what would a 15-year-old or 13-year-old do, not what a 30-year-old do, right? Because they'll, sure, I can do anything, right?
Yeah.
The first time I saw my older kids do entire transactions in the back of a car I was driving on their phone that would have formerly been complicated things to do, right? And they were already done. Yeah, get restaurant reservations, right, or whatever, right? You're like, okay, well, so I do think that it's just things that work well during the pandemic are just yet another example, the 1,000th example since the dawn of the internet, that the trend is always towards reducing friction in everything. Okay, friction could be a middleman, friction could be a multiple tier distribution system, whatever those things are that we all grew up with. It's never a question of if, it's just a question of how and when. And so if you're in a business that relies on some friction as part of its business model, you are a moron. Okay, but maybe you don't know it yet, but you are basically doomed and a moron. And if you're in a business that pushes on the lever of reducing friction and probably disrupts somebody else, that's a good place to be, even if it's tricky.
Yeah.
And this just accentuates it. The fact that you can now work from home for a big company for a 6-figure salary forever just seems like so fanciful. If you told me that 35 years ago, I would have just laughed at you. And now it's completely going to happen, right?
Yes, 100%. And even the financial models that people are running, like trading, all these trading. I have a trading floor in my dining room right now.
Mm-hmm.
And it's,
Why not?
At some point, I can't have company over, so it's the perfect place to have the trading floor. At some point.
Big table.
Yeah, it's a big table. But I think you're going to see a lot more of that and the ability for people to do those kinds of jobs where they didn't have access before.
Yeah, that's right. And so it's a good test, I guess. My only point is that it's a good intellectual test to run for whatever it is you're doing all day long. Is it, is what you're doing counter to that trend or going along with that trend?
Yes.
Right.
One of the books you told me to read when I met you through JT Fox was Shoe Dog.
Yeah, Shoe Dog. book, right?
Such a great book. And when you started our conversation, I don't know if you realized you'd said this, but a lot of business owners who are, hitting that point where it's critical and hard to navigate maybe the cash flow, or this is happening or that's happening. That has been one of the inspirations for me personally after you recommended that book, because I didn't realize that Nike had almost gone bankrupt 19 times.
I mean, when you read that book, you're convinced they're going to go bankrupt, even though you know they didn't.
Right. Yeah.
I know. No, that book, I mean, Phil Knight is a clever guy, and he's an unusual guy because he's kind of shy and awkward, and he's not like this kind of a guy, right? But that book is so well written because he wears his heart on his sleeve in the book. And he completely disrupted everything, just like we were talking about. I mean, he changed everything the way he did it. And he did a lot of it by the seat of his pants, right? He hired strange people. The first 5 or 6 people in the company were just all odd as hell, right?
Right.
But it all worked because he trusted his gut. And the other thing about it, which I think I've talked about before, is that, if you don't have a lot of passion around what you're doing to the point of being kind of weird about it, it probably the business you'll create will be kind of boring, So like Phil Knight, he really was a shoe dog. I mean, that's why the title is so good. He loved shoes. He loved how they were made. He totally geeked out on the last and the history. And so did Bill Bowerman, the coach at Oregon. And so shoes? I mean, it's so weird, Remember they found that guy buried in the Alps?
Yeah.
What was his name? Something man. What was that guy's name? Remember they found the guy from before 600 BC or 2000 BC.
I can't remember his name. I don't remember nouns right now. I'm struggling.
He had shoes on. That's the most interesting thing, is he'd made his own shoes.
Yes.
They couldn't believe it when they found him. He made shoes.
Yeah.
So anyway, yes, that is my 2 favorite books about being a weird CEO in a weird environment are that one and the one about Pixar, Creativity Inc.
Creativity.
Which is all really good about managing creativity in a very odd situation. Because the problem with reading books about Steve Jobs is that, you're not Steve Jobs. So, you're not a genius. You don't have great taste, right? You're not a Svengali. People won't march through walls for you. So all you learn how to do when you read about him is be a jerk, right?
Right. And a lot of people, that's the inauthenticity in leadership, I find. People will read books about Jeff Bezos or Bill Gates or Steve Jobs, and they're like, I'm going to lead this way. And it doesn't work. You have to lead your way.
Are you also a genius?
No.
Yeah, right. So it's always a good test.
Right.
Yes. I would reiterate to everyone should read Shoe Dog because it's really easy to relate to. Everybody likes Nikes, and it's an amazing book. And he does the best thing is he stops the book right when they go public, when it's still pretty small. He doesn't go through all the big company bullshit.
Yeah.
Just the first crazy parts to get there.
Yeah. Yeah, that really worked. And I was really appreciative that you had me read that book. It was really great.
Yeah, it puts a smile on your face, doesn't it?
It's completely. And on days where there's tough, because it's tough. I'm an entrepreneur and I'm coaching people and I'm helping them build their own company while building my own company. And sometimes it's challenging. And anytime I have that self-doubt creep in or moment, I just think about that book and I'm like, okay, just keep going. Figure it out. Figure it out.
He had a day job while he was doing it.
Right. Yeah.
Amazing.
As an accountant, right?
Right. Working for Price Waterhouse. Auditing people. Unbelievable. Right. Yeah.
Really great. So one of the things that you, obviously you work with Steve, you've worked with Bill and Paul Allen. What are some of the things that are your favorite moment or one favorite moment for you that kind of sticks out in terms of your own career where this was, you've done something you're incredibly proud of, you feel like I've arrived, I've made it, this is it for me? Is there any one moment in time?
That's a good question. It's funny. So I had this thing happen to me, and then I should go after this. I have another meeting. So I worked for Paul Allen for a long time, and I sold my company Starwave to Disney for a good price, and everybody was happy, and we built ESPN.com. And Paul during that time had become a huge investor in DreamWorks, the Katzenberg, Spielberg, Geffen thing. And because he was getting a lot of FaceTime with Jeffrey Katzenberg, who was suing Disney, he was getting a lot of anti-Disney sentiment from Katzenberg. So he was suspicious of Disney, even though he and I were the two biggest shareholders in Starwave. And so the more they paid, the more we both made. Our interests were completely aligned. And so we had kind of this weird thing where in the process of selling it, our relationship soured for a while, which was weird because I made him money, you know, and later on he took me out to lunch and he said, "You actually made me money." And I'm like, "Yeah," you know, so he like thanked me and everything. But anyway, so this was in late 1998 and we were just about finishing the process. And Paul Allen had this giant party where he chartered a cruise ship and sailed around Alaska for like 4 or 5 days. It was really a fun party. And it was like Steven Spielberg, Francis Ford Coppola, George Lucas, Jeff Goldblum, Robin Williams. It was a crazy party. I mean, there were like 50 super famous people, tons of Seattle tech people. Bill Gates was there. I was there. It was a crazy fun party. And at the time, I wasn't nearly as good friends with Bill Gates as I am now, although I knew him. And we were on this bird watching expedition from the cruise ship to go look for bald eagles because it was up in Alaska. And I was there with Bill, and we was like 40 of us in this little thing, and we were talking. And I told him basically what I just said, that, you know, I'm doing this thing. I'm just about done selling Star Wars to Disney. I got to work for Disney for a while. And, you know, Paul's like all kind of pissy, you know, and I was like really kind of, you know, here I am at this party, and it's just weird. It was dissonant. Okay. It wasn't good. Right.
Yeah.
And Bill Gates went out of his way. He took me aside from this bird watching expedition and spent 10 minutes telling me what a fabulous job I had done and how much value I'd created, how everybody made out well. I made money. Paul made money. Disney was happy. It was a great product. People at Microsoft were jealous of the work we'd done, you know, on and on, because we'd really pioneered a lot of internet technology. And I was like kind of moved by it.
Yeah.
And then I get back home and he sends me an email unprompted that's the same thing, suitable for framing. Like he sends me an email basically sort of codifying what he had told me in person, lest I didn't remember it or people didn't believe that he had told it to me. And he knew that he was Bill Gates doing it because his judgment in 1998 was probably the single most thing anybody could ask for in tech. And he knew that I knew him and everything, right? And he sent me this email out of the goodness of his heart, because of course he knew Paul Allen well and knew this funny quirk in his personality.
Right.
And he just sent it to be a great guy.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the moment, if you want to know, because nobody had to do this.
Right.
I'd sold the company. It was obvious I'd done a good job, right? But, you know, he just went out of his way. So it was important for two reasons. One is it was like, well, if he says so, I can't be a complete moron, right? And two, what a nice guy to do this, you know? So it blew me away, and it blew me away on two levels. One is I felt validated, and two is I felt like, okay, well, this is the way to act.
Yes.
Be nice to people when you don't have to be, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think and I know you got to go because you've got a meeting, and I'm really grateful for the time that you spent with me today. I think you just solidified the point on leadership. That is what leadership is.
Yes.
It's not anything else. That is the sign of a leader, like really getting someone at their purpose, letting them know you're valuable and you added value. I think
I'll tell you a last story. So I really didn't want to work for Microsoft out of Stanford Business School. I really wanted to work for Nike because I'm from Portland. And I'm a big Nike fan. And Phil Knight and I are both Oregon Ducks. We went to Stanford Business School. I was like, hey, we're the same person, you know? So I met him at Stanford Business School. He came and talked. And so I interviewed at Nike in 1983 in Portland. And I interviewed at Microsoft in 1983 in Seattle. And Nike was really disorganized. And unless you were like a champion marathon runner or from the shoe business or something, you weren't going to get a job. It was tiny. It was like 300 people. And Microsoft was slightly more organized, and they hired a couple of MBAs, and I got a job there. So 18 years later, on January 1st, 2002, Oregon is in the Fiesta Bowl playing Colorado, and they end up winning it, and they become number 2 in the nation in football that year. And I have a sideline pass from ESPN to the game. It's right after 9/11, so there aren't many sideline passes. And so does Phil Knight. So we're on the sideline of this game, and there's almost nobody on the sideline because it's right after 9/11. So there's maybe 10 civilians in the whole sideline of this game instead of the usual 50 or 100 or whatever.
Right.
So I walk up to him, and I reintroduce myself to him, and I tell him this story about how I grew up in Portland. In fact, we grew up in the same neighborhood in Portland. And I said, I really wanted to work for Nike. I went to interview. It was kind of a shit show. The place was really disorganized. So I ended up working for this goddamn software company in Seattle, and blah, 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 blah. And he laughs, and he looks at me, and he goes, he doesn't say anything like too bad or come work for me now. He just says, well, it worked out okay, and walks off. Like laughing.
Right. Yeah.
Really. So I thought that was
That's
cute.
awesome.
I know.
Yeah, those are great moments. I'm so glad that you shared them with us, and thank you so much for being on the CoachC podcast.
All right.
And, have a great rest of your day and week. Stay safe and healthy, obviously.
Yeah, and in Toronto, watch out for those bugs, man. Kill those mosquitoes. Right.
It's actually, we're now getting ready for, there's apparently a wave of cicadas that will be hatching every 17 years from the ground. Somewhere there is a big cicada swarming going to be happening in North America, and it will, I was meditating on my back deck this morning, and I could hear the cicadas. I'm like, oh, they're coming. They're coming.
Plague of locusts.
Yeah, so we'll have COVID, we'll have locusts, we'll have some murder hornets.
Murder hornet, don't even get me started. There's in Washington,
Oh, yeah.
They're here. Yeah.
Yeah, they're scary. So.
Okay. If I catch one, we'll come back on. Right.
Okay. Thanks again so much, Mike. I really appreciate your time. Thank you. Okay. Take care. Bye.